I woke up from surgery, and the first thing I noticed wasn't the pain. It was that there was no face I recognized waiting for me. No one in that chair by the bed. Just a nurse I'd never met checking a monitor I didn't understand. And somewhere between the anesthesia and the fluorescent lights, I thought, how did I let it get to this point? I'm 78 years old. I don't have children. And for most of my life, that was simply a fact, not a problem, not a wound, just the shape my life took. But that afternoon in the recovery room, I realized there was a gap in my life that I had been very carefully not looking at. Not because I was in denial exactly, more because I didn't have the language for it yet. I spent years planning what would happen to my things after I died. 12 pages of documents about my library, my accounts, a few pieces of furniture with stories attached. 12 pages about what happens after, and nothing, not one sentence, about what happens to me before that. During the years when I might need someone to drive me somewhere, when someone might need to make a phone call on my behalf, when a doctor asks, is there anyone we should contact? And the honest answer is complicated. That's what this video is about. Not death, not a care home brochure. The years in between, and how I started at 74 to actually build something for them. The first thing I did, and it took me longer than it should have, was make a list, not of everyone I know, of who I would actually call at 3 in the morning if I had a medical problem. Real names, real people. I gave myself 20 minutes. I came up with 4 names. And when I looked at that list, I noticed something uncomfortable. One of those 4 people was someone I hadn't spoken to in 8 months. No argument, no falling out, just life moving the way it does. I had been counting him as present because he had been present in the past. I was managing my relationships in memory, not in reality. If you're doing that calculation in your head right now, running through names, hesitating, not sure who would actually pick up, you're not alone. Research from AARP found that adults over 65 consistently overestimate how many people are genuinely available for practical support. Not emotionally necessarily, practically. The person who would leave work early to take you to an appointment. That's a different category. And here's what that list showed me. I had been confusing 2 completely different things. Who takes care of your body is not the same person as who makes decisions for you. After that surgery, a neighbor came every day for 2 weeks with food. Genuinely kind, genuinely generous. But when my doctor called with test results and I had to choose between 2 treatment approaches, I sat alone in a room with a piece of paper in my hand and no one to think out loud with. The person bringing soup and the person helping you decide, those can be the same person, but they don't have to be. And assuming they are is a mistake I'd been making for years. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. This is going to end with hire a professional caregiver or move somewhere smaller. I thought the same thing every time I almost had this conversation with myself. And I want to be honest, there are no perfect solutions here. What I found is something more modest than that, a structure. Incomplete, imperfect, but deliberate. And deliberate turned out to be the word that changed everything for me. So let me tell you what I actually did, not what you should do, what I did. After the list, I had conversations, one by one with each of the 4 people. And I want to be clear about how badly I started the first one. I was indirect, vague, using words like planning and thinking ahead and just in case. She stopped me politely and said, "Are you trying to ask me if you can count on me if you need help someday?" I said yes. She said, "Then ask me that." That correction was worth more than anything I'd read on the subject. The conversation that matters isn't the one you ease into carefully. It's the one where you actually say the thing. 2 of those 4 conversations were real. One person told me she'd been thinking about exactly the same question for herself and had never found anyone to talk to about it. The other was honest enough to say she was honored, but also a little scared, and we spent an hour figuring out together what would be reasonable to ask and what wouldn't. That was one of the most useful hours I've had in recent years. The other two didn't really land. One got uncomfortable and changed the subject. The other agreed to everything without actually engaging. And that taught me something I've thought about many times since. Who says they'll be there is not the same as who will be there. I don't say that to be cynical. I say it because it changed how I think about building this kind of network. You're not recruiting people for a role. You're finding out who's actually in the room, and then being honest about what you see. Here's something that made the whole thing feel less overwhelming. I had been imagining that I needed one person who could do everything. Drive me to appointments, make medical decisions, check in regularly, manage the house during a recovery. When I framed it that way, the ask felt impossible. It felt like I was looking for someone to give up a significant portion of their life for me, and who would agree to that? But when I started separating those functions, logistics, decisions, emotional presence, practical help, I realized I had different people for different things, and none of them needed to carry everything. The person I'd want in the room for a difficult medical conversation is not necessarily the same person I'd ask to water my plants and collect my mail. Thinking in functions instead of a single person made the whole architecture suddenly visible. There's actually a framework for this that people who specialize in this kind of planning call circles of support. The idea is that your network has layers. The innermost circle is the people you'd call in a real crisis, and then wider circles of friends, regular contacts, shared activities. People without children often have the outer circles well populated and the inner circle thin. The work isn't to make more acquaintances, it's to deepen what's already close. And then there's the part that nobody talks about because it sounds either bureaucratic or morbid depending on the day. The legal documents. When I finally sat down with a lawyer, not an estate lawyer, but someone who specifically handles what they call incapacity planning, he asked me a question I hadn't expected. He said, "What do you want to happen if you temporarily lose the ability to make decisions? After surgery, during a hospitalization, a period of cognitive confusion?" Temporarily. I hadn't thought about temporarily. I had thought about death. I had thought about permanent incapacity. But most real crises are temporary, and without the right documents, other people make decisions for you during that time. Not necessarily the decisions you'd make. Not necessarily with the values you'd want applied. A healthcare proxy, a living will, a durable power of attorney. These exist in some form in most countries under different names. The World Health Organization estimated a few years back that fewer than 30% of adults over 65 have any form of advance directive in place, even in countries where they're easy to access. That number stopped me, because the best time to sign those documents is exactly when you're healthy enough that they feel premature. When you actually need them, it may be too late to write them. I'll be honest. I procrastinated on this for years because it felt like an acknowledgement of something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. What I found on the other side of signing them was something I didn't expect, a kind of lightness. I had spent years vaguely anxious about a future I hadn't planned for. Having the plan didn't eliminate the uncertainty, but it gave the uncertainty a shape I could work with. There's one more piece I want to mention, and it's the most practical one. Where you live is a care decision. At 75, I looked around my house, a house I genuinely love, and I tried to see it honestly for the first time. The stairs I'd climbed 10,000 times without thinking. The bathroom that works perfectly for the person I am now. The distance from the center of town, which was comfortable when I drove and would become something else entirely if I stopped. I didn't need to move immediately. I didn't change anything that month. But I walked through every room and asked, does this work if I need physical support? And the answer in a few places was no. Not catastrophically, but no. And knowing that early meant I could think about it instead of being forced into it. Research on this is pretty consistent. Most people over 50 want to stay in their homes as they age, but very few have made any modifications to make that possible. The gap between what we intend and what we've actually prepared for, that's where most of the crisis decisions get made. So where does all of this leave me? I have two people in my life I trust with difficult decisions. I have the legal documents in place. I have a clearer sense of my house than I did 3 years ago. And I have a picture of what kind of care I want and honestly what kind I don't want. But I want to be straight with you about something. There are still days when I look at all of that and feel like it's not enough. Not because it's wrong. Because no plan fully replaces the feeling of having someone who shows up because they want to, not because they were asked, not because they signed something, but because they want to. I haven't entirely made peace with that. I'm working on it. What I've stopped doing is waiting for the feeling to go away before I act. The plan doesn't have to feel complete to be real. The architecture doesn't have to be beautiful to hold weight. I opened this by saying I woke up from surgery and there was no face I knew in that room. That's still true. But what's different now is that I know who I would call. I know what I've asked of them and what they've said yes to. I know what the documents say. I know what the house needs. The room after the next surgery, if there is one, I've thought about who might be in it. Not having children doesn't mean not having someone to care for you. It means you have to build that answer. Deliberately, explicitly, earlier than feels necessary, instead of inheriting it. I'd really like to know where you are with this. Have you made the list? The people you'd actually call at 3 in the morning. How many names do you have? You don't need to say who, just the number. Tell me in the comments. And if there was a specific moment, a surgery, an illness, a scare, when this question became real for you for the first time, I'd like to hear that too. These are conversations most of us never have. Maybe we can start having them here. If this kind of conversation is something you want more of, stay close. There's more coming.